A thick carpet of snow blankets the Love Canal neighborhood in winter, but walk through this Niagara Falls community, past its school and homes. You'll see that something is terribly wrong.
People don't understand. If they come here and see it, then it really bothers them to see a whole neighborhood that was fairly new homes, all boarded up and kind of abandoned. It's kind of a ghost town.
Yes, a kind of ghost town. Children don't play here anymore. The school is closed. Families have moved away. Only the giant earth movers roam the Love Canal, by now the most notorious chemical dump in this country. Sickness and death have guaranteed it a place in history. There are other dangerous chemical dumps cropping up everywhere, it seems. The government says there may be 1,000. Nobody knows for sure. In Lowell, Massachusetts, thousands of barrels of industrial solvents and powerful acids were found abandoned. Many were rusted or cracking open, spilling their contents into the groundwater. In Louisville, Kentucky, it's the same story. Deadly chemicals dumped and forgotten are finally leaking out. And it's our story tonight, the story of chemical graveyards and what their poisons are doing to us as they escape. If you think someone else is taking care of this problem, someone in Washington or at City Hall or the state capitol, our story may give you second thoughts. Tonight, we'll meet the people who found out for themselves.
The Unquiet Grave, reported this evening by David Burns.
Our story begins in the city of Niagara Falls about 80 years ago. That's when factories began replacing souvenir shops as the main industry here. A few years before the turn of the century, William Love broke the sod for a new canal. He had great dreams of an industrial city built beside his project. But his dreams died. Power plants and factories went up a few miles away on the Niagara Falls. The Love Canal was abandoned. There are half a dozen big chemical factories here now, including Hooker Chemical Company. Back in the 40s, they dumped thousands of drums of poisonous chemicals in the old canal. Then the canal was filled in, covered over. Soon there was a school and homes lined the banks. Then the time bomb exploded.
How long will it take to clean up the mess? Good Lord, who knows that?
People who live around here remember how it happened. Even people who were moved out still come back to meetings like this one. It took years to get action on Love Canal. They don't want to lose momentum now that they're in the spotlight. They say there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Now these are the kind of pictures that Debbie has. This is actually behind Debbie's house. See, and she has some of these, and this just shows you that, you can. She has several of these kinds.
Mind you, we've been walking in that backyard bare feet, having picnics back there, camping back there, and just living there for years. We've always been outdoor people. We've spent most of our time in the summer in our backyard, and this is what we woke up to.
Debbie Cirillo, her 3 children, and her husband are one of the families hit hard by the Love Canal disaster. They are one of more than 200 families uprooted and evacuated by the state last fall. By then, the presence and danger of poisonous chemicals in homes near the canal was well established. Just beyond the Cirillo's backyard fence is the deepest part of the dump. In 1977, it erupted.
What would happen is the barrels would come to the surface, they'd peek through. This looks like a moonshot of what the moon looks like. These barrels would surface into these holes, and it has, the barrels would rust and spill toxic chemicals on the surface. This one particular hole is only like a foot from my fence edge.
Chemicals leaking out of the canal caused a sharp increase in the number of miscarriages and birth defects in the neighborhood. Mrs. Cirillo lost 2 children when she lived there. These days, she's busy with her new home. There are still medical problems. Her children have skin rashes that haven't cleared up. One child has been diagnosed as hyperactive. Both conditions can be caused by exposure to the kinds of chemicals leaking out of the canal. More than 80 chemical compounds have been identified so far in samples taken from the dump. They are known to cause diseases ranging from epilepsy to cancer, asthma, liver disorder, and a score of other illnesses. Debbie Cirillo never misses neighborhood meetings. She's angry that it took so long to get the city and state interested in what was happening. It was 2 years after the first newspaper headlines warned of dangerous chemicals leaking into homes before the families were finally evacuated. And it's not over yet. Lois Gibbs is president of the Love Canal Residents Association. Her children, like many in the area, will have to be tested every year for signs of liver disease and leukemia. She says local, state, and federal government action on the canal has always been too little, too late. To these residents, Love Canal is the same kind of disaster as a flood or a tornado. They want the government to evacuate everyone.
If the bodies aren't mangled, floating down a river, hung on a tree, the house is demolished, they don't consider it a disaster. Well, there's no difference here. The bodies are just being mangled from the inside out. Right. It's still
But the homeowners haven't been able to convince everyone that Love Canal is the same as other disasters. The federal government has refused to use disaster funds to pay the bill. That leaves the state to pay the bulk of an estimated $22 million to deal with the chemical contamination. That pays for the homes that have been evacuated and for an elaborate plan to trench and cover the canal itself with clay. And the state says the disaster stops just past the second row of houses away from the canal. People who live in the surrounding neighborhood have not been evacuated, and they are angry. They say their own medical survey shows higher than normal levels of many diseases, and they have experts who back their claims. 6 months after the first evacuations, the state confirmed that miscarriages are higher than normal in the surrounding area where people still live. But when government officials refused to evacuate everyone, the residents exploded.
We have also brought to the governor our recommendation that children under 2 years of age be removed from the canal until such time as they are older than 2, or until such time as extensive environmental data.
You're not human, you have no heart. Human people would not do this to people. You can't ruin our lives like this. You're destroying us. We're not people to you, we're numbers. Well, it's gotta stop.
My daughter was under 2 then. She's 2 years and 4 months now. Why is she of no importance now?
We want out! 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 We want out!
Jackie Mazaki says she would like to have her family evacuated from the Love Canal area. Every night she rubs medicine on her daughter Tina's face and arms to control a severe rash. She says she's never gotten a good explanation from doctors about what might be causing it. Her son Mike likes to play outdoors, but too often comes home with an allergic reaction, headaches, puffy eyes, and trouble breathing. He's on medication to control the symptoms. Like many families here, the Mazakis have gone to their family physician to see if chemicals might be causing their medical problems. In most cases, they've gotten few definite answers.
Let's go for a shot this afternoon.
Uh-oh. All right. Mike, you can put your shirt back on. I'm going to go over and sit down for a minute and talk to Mother. Michael's original blood work indicated the blood itself indicated in the 17% eosinophils, but I really think that relates primarily to his basic allergy problems,
What does that
which
mean?
he's had.
The numbers, like 17.
Well,
and that, like you're
17%
saying.
eosinophil. If I could go back, maybe Dr. Grabiak has had some blood counts in the past. However, the repeat is down to 4%, which is quite normal. And even
the blood test is one of the most important used to track chemical poisoning, but it doesn't tell the whole story, and chemical toxicity is a new field to most physicians. Very little is known about low-level exposure in humans, especially when dozens of chemicals can combine and interact within the body.
But the fact is that it's that allergies and asthma, and I think he felt that Michael has had asthma in the past. Asthma is known to be induced by irritants among many other causes. To be positive that a particular irritant is related to allergy, that's a completely different story. And this is where many of the families are right now.
So more or less you still have to wait out the period of knowing.
I think we all have to wait.
Right.
You have to wait. We have to wait. Fortunately, as I said before, in the children, we have a large number of children in the area, apart from those with birth defects that we know about and a few serious illnesses. Everyone else at the present time, at least we don't see any signs of active toxic effects in the children. We too will have to remain alert and look, because all the systems of the body can be involved. It's also true that effects can be delayed.
Families who haven't been evacuated say they're being used as guinea pigs in a giant experiment. The state says that it can't do anything more until it has proof that families living here are in fact in danger. But it's not clear anyone can really tell how dangerous it may be to live near Love Canal or near other chemical dumps. By the time the first samples began arriving at this lab in Albany for analysis, the situation was already serious. People were very sick. The signs of chemical poisoning were as plain as day. But even for the state health laboratories, with the most sophisticated equipment available, Love Canal poses real problems. There are more than 70,000 commercial chemicals in use today. Hundreds of new ones are added every year. With few exceptions, there is little information on which ones are hazardous. Dioxin is one of the chemicals in the canal, perhaps as much as 100 pounds. It is the most deadly chemical ever created. 3 ounces are enough to kill 1 million people. Yet as dangerous as dioxin is, no laboratory here is equipped to detect and measure its presence. An out-of-state lab did run a few samples. One was from Debbie Cirilla's backyard. That sample showed trace amounts of dioxin. Love Canal is so contaminated with chemicals that the threat to its immediate neighbors was obvious. But as we've seen, families like the Mazakis get few answers, either from their own doctors or from the state. It is difficult to analyze samples of dirt and sludge for deadly chemicals, but it is even more difficult for physicians to detect early signs of chemical poisoning in people. That's especially true when children are involved.
First of all, it's unlikely that he would know to what degree the child was exposed to any given chemical. He probably wouldn't know how long the child had been exposed, what the concentration of exposure was, or any of those kinds of parameters. He would be able to get probably a couple physical measurements that would give him some indication, but that would be it. Secondly, he wouldn't know how susceptible the individual child was relative to other children to this particular chemical agent. He might not have any idea what behaviors would be changed by the chemical agent and what to even look for. So he would pretty much be at a total loss.
Dr. Deborah Corey is a researcher who's conducting experiments on what toxic chemicals do to animal behavior. Her work has important implications for health experts and for families like the Mazakis. Doctors usually don't diagnose chemical poisoning unless there is clear evidence of heavy exposure and obvious physical symptoms. But Dr. Corey's research suggests that long before clear signs of chemical poisoning are visible to the eye, damage has already been done to the central nervous system. The damage is evident in subtle changes in behavior. In experiments with animals, she's demonstrated that learning ability and mental performance are impaired by exposure to toxic chemicals, even when there are no physical symptoms. Other researchers at the University of Rochester are demonstrating that even the sense of touch is damaged by exposure to toxicity. No one has made these kinds of tests on the Mazaki family or other families who still live near the Love Canal. The work is still experimental, but Dr. Corey is convinced.
I guess I would have to say that if it was me living near one of those dumps, I would move away because of what I already know about most of these chemical agents, and because of what I have what my research has shown suggests that you would get some subtle behavioral changes before you see any overt signs of toxicity, which would make me very wary of waiting around until physiological symptoms showed up.
That might be good advice. A few dozen families can always be evacuated, or even a few hundred. But what about an entire town that's threatened?
There's our water tower over there. In between that water tower and this landfill is the water wells, which provide the water for probably half the town.
And what's in this dump?
Everything.
PCBs?
Sure, PCBs.
Chemicals?
Other chemical wastes, municipal garbage, septic tank waste.
Gardner Congdon is town supervisor of Moreau, near Glens Falls and about an hour north of Albany. The General Electric Company has a plant here. For years, it used a chemical known as PCB in electrical devices it manufactured. For years, it dumped waste PCB into the Hudson River and carted it away to landfills. Now we know that PCB is a deadly toxic chemical. The dumping has been stopped. PCB is banned. But the problem remains.
We have, right in the immediate Glens Falls area, probably 8 municipal landfills that at one time or another have received industrial waste from not only General Electric but other industries. And I think what is significant here that just 10 years ago, the State Health Department, this site here, was approved by the Health Department, and in spite of the fact that it was a wetlands, and it was obviously, if you look out there, it's right on the river plain. The river's only about 600 or 700 feet through those trees.
One of the worst PCB dump sites in the area has been partly cleaned up. In December, Gardner Congdon ordered bulldozers in after children near the dump came down with rashes and other signs of PCB poisoning. Blood tests showed higher than normal levels of the chemical. Congdon got involved when the state refused to take action.
Answer these questions, and I don't know whether they're afraid of a public panic, of a run on their testing facilities, but I don't think that the way to solve problems is to deny that the problems exist. And I think that's what we're having here, a denial of the state that there's really a problem, in spite of all the statistics on the dangers of PCB that are in existence and readily available for anybody to read.
Congdon began drawing together medical information on PCB when one of his constituents called and described a strange rash his son had developed. Earlier, the boy was playing near a landfill.
Well, he rode his motorcycle out there and he played out there all the while. Matter of fact, they built a fort out there. And it was really, to me, I thought he was going to die, you know. I mean, he looked at me like something that come out of one of these horror movies, like I just repeated myself. And so I said to him, "What are you doing home from school?" He said, "Well, I'm sick, Daddy. Look, it's my eyes."
They wouldn't diagnose because the doctor that I took him to really didn't know much about PCB in the first place. But then another local doctor who's been studying the PCBs for probably 10 years, he was on the telephone with my doctor, and they gave the symptoms over the phone, and this doctor said right then and there, you know, it's every symptom.
2 of our boys that came down with a rash and skin blotches, swelling of the eyes, that we had never seen anything as severe as this before, and realized that there were other neighborhood boys, the Van Gilder boy and still another young lad, that were experiencing the same problems all at the same time, which I think was a little more than being just a coincidence.
Anybody can walk into any of these places. You talk in most of the country, they talk about a landfill, they assume that a landfill is a fenced-in area that someone has a key to. Landfills up here, everybody has a dump in their own backyard. Landfill, no such thing. Our exposure is tremendous, and I would like to have it stop. When they clean up the Hudson, I'd like them to also clean up this area and stop our exposure. Sometimes I think we're an environmental trade-off. People are worried more about the fish than they are about the people.
I'm not worried so much about now. I'm worried about what's the effects it's going to have on them 5 years from now or 3 years from now. You know, there's all kinds of things that can happen to them, so I understand from this thing, right?
I think they should have used this opportunity to come up and to look around and find out just exactly how much exposure has been, how much exposure there is. Maybe they don't have the long-term studies, but eventually they will, and they've got no opportunity better than the one they have today, than to start looking out for the people and look out for the people in this area.
They have completely ignored us, completely ignored us. Mr. Conklin can say that, right, huh? They completely ignored us.
As the supervisor here, are you satisfied with the way the state has handled this from the beginning?
I think we're missing the point here. The position right now that we're hearing, everybody's hearing from the state, that this PCB issue is something brand new, that there is no criteria, there's nothing to compare levels that are being discovered today. And I have found out just in the last month that this is not it's not true. Pete Sedgwick is right here. We have with us a report from the State Health Department dated in 1975, that's over 3 years ago, where samples were taken of his son and other children showing high levels of PCB contamination in their blood. These kids played near the Kingsbury landfill. So the fact that children playing near a dump and could pick up high levels of PCB in their blood was known by the New York State Health Department.
The most contaminated part of the Caputo dump site has been carted away to an approved chemical landfill, but it was the smallest and the easiest to clean up. The others, including the dump threatening Moreau's water supply, can't simply be taken away.
Oh, this would be impossible to clean up. There's 16 acres of material down there, 30 feet deep. Forget about cleaning it up. It's an impossibility.
Love Canal has forced people to look in their own backyards to see what might be buried there. Like the people of Glens Falls, they often don't like what they discover. The question is, who will pay the cleanup costs? Love Canal has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of money. Now that other chemical graveyards are being discovered, the state says there isn't any money to deal with them. The federal government is refusing to get involved, so it looks as though localities will have to shoulder the burden themselves. But people who've been through this already at Love Canal don't think that's very realistic.
The state is going to have to come in on almost every instance. And the reason is the local people aren't going to do it. I mean, it was up to the local people since '76. Residents were fighting with them, Niagara County Health Department, to do something, and they never did. If it wasn't for the state coming in now, we still may be sitting here, a lot of us unaware of what the problems are and just getting sicker. I don't think the local will, because they have too much at interest, even more so than the state. They have a smaller budget. They have a smaller personnel. They don't have the facilities for testing. I just don't think it would ever be done.
You might think that it would be easy to make the companies who buried this stuff pay to clean it up, but in fact, it's nearly impossible. They've protected themselves with various legal tools that are difficult to fight in court. For the public, the stakes are getting very, very high. The dumping of poisonous chemicals hasn't stopped. Only a fraction of the toxic materials made in this country are properly disposed of, and they are becoming more difficult to remove when they are discovered. Just about an hour's drive south of the Love Canal is another chemical graveyard, only this one is radioactive. The plant that produced it is closed now, but for several years the Getty Oil Company operated a nuclear fuel reprocessing facility here. Buried out back on state-owned land are hundreds of tons of radioactive chemicals and debris. It would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to clean it all up. The government doesn't want to spend that kind of money. But people who live in West Valley want it cleaned up at any cost. In 20 years, they say, it will be another Love Canal. Already there is proof that some of the radioactive chemicals in the dump have leaked out. And people in West Valley have reached the same conclusion that Love Canal residents discovered. There is no one looking out for their health but themselves.
I have here petitions signed by thousands of Western New Yorkers asking for this site to be cleaned up and asking that no more waste be brought in. I brought these petitions today to show you how many of us there are. We will fight. We will fight with every means open to us, not just now during the decision process, but on and on and on. Through every step of the way, you will meet with nothing but resistance. We will intervene in every hearing. We will scrutinize every report. We will write letters till our fingers drop off. We will go to the courts. We will go to Congress, not just once, but over and over and over.
This has been a public affairs presentation of WXXI-TV, which is solely responsible for its content.